right now we are working on some really incredible stuff. I'm sure most of you have noticed the increase in quality of our videos in general, and with that comes more hours spent working on them. We didn't want to leave you with nothing while we toil away, so please enjoy our compilation of some of our favorite lost media videos we've ever made. As a disclaimer, some of these videos are pretty old and may have some outdated narrating, editing, and information. Think of it more as a time capsule than anything. Sit back, relax, and enjoy this bingeable collection of lost media.
And the Masters of the Universe! I am Adam, Prince of
He-Man and the Masters of the Universe was a toy line that originated in 1982 that eventually spawned a TV show and has gained cult status over the years, with the vintage figures skyrocketing popularity and price due to the fanbase. He-Man was a different franchise, as its hook was colorful and wacky characters packed with mini-comics that all had a special gimmick. My personal favorites being Stinkor, Master of Odor, and yes, he really does stink 30 years later, Trapjaw, an evil henchman of Skeletor that had interchangeable arms and weapons, making him an awesome toy, and Faker, the evil robotic clone of Skeletor made in He-Man's image to trick the heroes of Eternia, He-Man and Friends home. With He-Man having a huge fan base and people with huge He-Man collections, you'd think that every vintage figure would go counted for. But no, there was one figure dubbed Wonderbread He-Man by fans and collectors. The figure gets its name, Wonderbread He-Man, from many collectors recalling the exact same experience with the figure by getting it through a mail-away promotion through the bread company, Wonderbread. First appearing to the internet scene in the early 1990s, this He-Man figure had brown hair and wore a black armor variant worn by Zodak that came packed with the extra weapons and armor set, and he was equipped with a black axe and black sword that came with a Man-E-Faces figure promotion, where for a limited time he came with extra weapons. So Wonderbread He-Man's accessories are easy to pinpoint on specific sets and other figures, but where did his brown hair and brown loincloth black belt hybrid come from? Many people claim it was a custom, but when the figure's popularity skyrocketed, many other people remember vivid memories of owning the figure and playing with the figure during their childhood. When Wonderbread He-Man had reached its peak in the collecting world, collectors actually asked the former owners of Mattel, the creators of He-Man, to see if they could give a clear answer to whether or not this figure was real. Mattel said that they never had a promotion with Wonderbread and left it at that, but we aren't completely done talking about Mattel. Mattel was set to license figures from the movie Conan, starring good old Arnie, but when the toy manufacturer saw a pre-screening of the film, they were appalled at the nudity and violence, and they turned down the figure license for Conan. But Mattel still did see a market for buffed up boys' toys, so they decided to go their own route and create He-Man, who in design and nature was kind of a futuristic barbarian hybrid. Collectors speculate if Wonderbread He-Man is actually a Conan figure that made its way onto the market, but that theory was debunked by the Netflix documentary The Toys That Made Us, He-Man, when the creators talk about how no prototypes, let alone full painted figures, were made for the Conan line. Dan Larson of Toy Galaxy, who also did a brilliant video about Wonderbread He-Man, brings up the theory of the Mandela effect, which in my opinion is kind of the easy way out of people remembering something that never happened, but it is strange how so many people remember the figure, but so many other people don't remember it at all, including Mattel. In recent years, Wonderbread He-Man has gained cult status in the collecting world as being one of the weirdest cases of toy history ever. Even recently in the Masters of the Universe Classics line, Wonderbread He-Man got an upgrade, now named Wondar. He's a barbaric woodland man, and the figure even comes packaged with a little loaf of bread, a tiny nod to the original Wonderbread theory. We are definitely going to have to call this file a mystery. Just like in our Max Headroom video, this mystery is just too old to be debunked, with over 20 years of relevance. Wonderbread He-Man is one of the coolest and strangest mysteries in the toy collecting community. Hi and welcome to Debunk File. My name is Sep and today we're going to be talking about the mystery known as Who is Mr. Fantastik? Now this mystery is definitely going to be pretty different than your normal mystery, as this one actually lies in the music industry, more specifically the hip-hop industry. The world of hip-hop has many different personalities, whether it's hardcore gangsters or laid-back jazz rap. There's all different kinds of people out there, but one MC stands out more than anybody else, and his name is MF Doom. What Doom did was something truly unique and incredible, as he literally created his own world through his music. He is the supervillain and ruler of his own world, obviously inspired by Dr. Doom, and the atmosphere and world building he created within his music is truly remarkable. He constantly uses samples from old superhero cartoons, especially Spider-Man, and is so devoted to his character that even in public he wears the metal mask everywhere he goes, and keeps his personal life very quiet, so it does not distract from the character. Now Doom is really smart, and what he did was actually create a mystery in his own music about one of the guys featured on 2 songs. His name is Mr. Fantastik, and he has been featured on 2 songs made by MF Doom. The songs are Antimatter and Rap Snitch Knishes, and on these 2 songs, Mr. Fantastik has incredible guest verses on and almost out-rap Doom, and that right there is an incredible achievement. Naturally, with how incredible these verses were, people went to go check out Mr. Fantastik's discography, but there is none. Besides these 2 features, he literally doesn't have any other music at all, or at least not under the same persona. This wouldn't be such a big deal if Mr. Fantastik wasn't so incredible. It's truly hard to believe that someone who made verses this good just didn't have a solo rap career. Doom has given this mystery attention before himself, on Antimatter, which is one of the songs Mr. Fantastik is featured on, where Doom says,
"Who is he? You need to get outlaw, or either get out of here like some dang outlaw."
On an interview a while back, Doom was also asked who Mr. Fantastik was, and he said, "Mr. Fantastik no longer exists." That's why over the years, hip-hop heads have been searching for the answer, who is Mr. Fantastik? One of the possibilities is that this is the pitched-down voice of a fellow rapper and friend of Doom named Rodan. I gave his music a listen, and sure enough, he does kinda sound like Mr. Fantastik, and it is possible, as Doom himself has many other alter egos, so the chances that his friend over here has one too is possible, especially when he sounds like him a little bit.
In these streets, eating and breathing, believing, keeping these devils bleeding, leaving these stitches, sleeping with the fish-eyed heathen, stringing them up, now we first stringing like Willie Beeman.
Now it is important to mention that the majority of MF Doom's upbringing was in New York, because in New York there was a super underground rap group that was found called UFON. And there were 2 members, Slim Pickens and Mr. Fantastik. The chances that New York could hold 2 rappers called Mr. Fantastik seems unbelievably slim. So this has to be our answer, right? Well, I don't think it is. When listening to songs by this group, I found out that neither of them sound anything like Mr. Fantastik at all, so unfortunately, they can't be our answer. Another popular theory is that he is Count Bass D, a rapper, producer, and good friend of Doom, but I don't know why anybody ever thought it was him, as he doesn't sound a single thing like Mr. Fantastik at all. There are smart people that knew that, and instead decided to ask him if he knew who Mr. Fantastik was, and the flood of questions forced him to talk about it on Instagram, pretty recently actually. Unfortunately though, he did not answer it. Well, he kinda did. He basically said that they were just 2 friends messing around in the studio together making rhymes, and Mr. Fantastik clearly doesn't want to reveal himself, so he hasn't yet, and he has the right to do that. We all want to know who he is so bad and listen to his other music so badly, but I can respect his decision of not doing that.
This is 2 friends bugging out, freestyling, like, writing some quick rhymes in the studio, having fun. And folks want to jump in it. Like, the man obviously doesn't want to reveal himself, if he hasn't dropped anything else in 14, 15 years.
Now of course, as showed throughout this video, we did not find out who Mr. Fantastik truly was. Was he any one of these rappers that we theorized about before? Yes, it's possible, but the chance is higher that this was just one of Doom's personal friends who was just messing around and having a good time with his friends, and they made songs together. How is Mr. Fantastic this good? Honestly, I have no idea. Maybe it's from being around Doom so much, but yeah, Mr. Fantastic is clearly just a normal guy that made 2 songs with his friend and obviously didn't want to be in the rap game for whatever reason. And since we can't possibly find out who this man truly is, we're gonna have to call this file a mystery. London After Midnight is a 1927 horror mystery film starring legendary character actor Lon Chaney, who most people know from playing Eric in The Phantom of the Opera. The movie was distributed by MGM and directed by another legend in horror, Todd Browning, who directed 1931's Dracula, a staple of horror today. As you could tell from the intro and some past videos we've made, specifically the older Who inspired, Jeff and I are extremely into classic horror, especially Universal monsters, the best kind of stuff to get into this Halloween. But so far, all I've done was talk about the movie lightly, so let's talk more in depth about what the movie was. Well, I'm afraid I can't do that today, because London After Midnight has been lost since 1965 when MGM's film vault set ablaze and hundreds of other films were lost. London isn't just notorious for its disappearance, but also its alleged curse. Before getting into the meat of this video, I want to explain how a movie could be lost, or especially lost to a fire. Now, I know you all aren't stupid. I'm not gonna sit here and explain this to you all like children. Obviously, VHS and home releases weren't available in 1965, so older films' only copies were stored in warehouses. Film was extremely flammable, and we have lost many classic films, not just horror, to the unfortunate short-sightedness of preserving these old films. Now first, we are going to discuss the overall appeal that drives horror fans to hopefully one day see this movie. Well, a lot of this film still exists. London After Midnight in its entirety is gone, yes, but don't let that get you down. Tons of stills and promotional images still exist, and the famous picture of Lon Chaney in his makeup dressed in a cloak, top hat, and decked out with 2 rows of sharp teeth, in my opinion, is enough to drive the interest in this movie. But trust me, everyone is different. I already briefly brushed upon the star power this movie held in just its director and star alone. It's so hard to understand how huge Lon Chaney was, and for countless of his movies to just go missing, especially since it was directed by Todd Browning. If images aren't enough and you're just itching to know what the story's about, then you are also in luck, because the script still exists. That's right, the entire script is on Google for anyone to read and has also helped in piecing the stills together to make a semi-movie, which is what happened in 2002, when the stills coupled with music made up a pseudo-remaster of a long-lost movie. Will it ever be found is certainly the question of the century. Every now and again, the horror community will get wind of it possibly still being out there in wreckage or in a private collection. It feels like every 5 years there will come a news article claiming to have found it, only to lead to false hope. I don't think London is truly lost. I think it still might be out there in someone's collection, but we won't know until those collectors or film historians possibly find it in an old abandoned warehouse with thousands of old tapes. I briefly touched upon its remake in 2002, which again isn't truly a remake, but a Frankenstein of pictures matched to the script to simulate how it could have looked. There is technically a reboot, Mark of the Vampire, which many consider it to have the same plot, and this one actually starred Dracula himself, Bela Lugosi. There were rumors of making a modern reboot of the film for I don't know how long. The plan was to get Ron Chaney, Lon Chaney Sr.'s grandson. It could work, as Ron is only 65 as of this recording, so hopefully all goes through. Now to the curse.
This is by far the wildest of anything I've talked about so far. In 1928, a year after the film's release, Robert Williams claimed to have seen horrifying visions of Lon Chaney's character from the film that convinced him to murder Julia Mangan with a razor. It was published in newspapers that it seems Lon Chaney can terrify anyone. Unfortunately, 2 years later, Chaney died of a throat hemorrhage. Was this film really enchanted? This really adds to the allure, a lost film with somewhat hazardous intentions. So what to make of all this? All of it together. The loss, the supposed curse, it's a lot to take in, especially for anyone not familiar with older films. This video is a special and sort of way to explain this story, but it's still a mystery as to where London After Midnight truly is. Personally, I think it'll be found one day, but that might just be blind optimism. You might or might not have an idea of how badly Jiff and I want to see this film. Fingers crossed.
In the horror sphere, lost media has always been a forefront. It's just something people really seem to be interested in, including myself. Whether we're talking about lost video games, lost episodes and shows, or like today, lost music, people are fascinated in this stuff, including us. One really popular mystery recently that is similar to what we will be covering today is the song that has been nicknamed the most mysterious song on the internet. It pretty much follows a song that aired on a German radio station back in the 1980s, and no one really knows where it came from at all. It was covered by Wang this year, who made 2 great videos on it. But with the mystery we are covering today, it isn't just a song that is being searched for. It's an entire album. The mystery's roots come from, where else of course but 4chan, where an anonymous user created a post on the music board saying, "I picked this up because it looked interesting. I wasn't able to find any references to it online whatsoever." Even with super obscure bands, you might expect to find an old MySpace page mentioned in some form. Does anybody recognize this album? After he talks about what the album sounds like, but more importantly he linked a picture of the cover right here, looking at the picture we see that the album is called Deathmetal, and is by a group named Panchikos. His post immediately gained traction, where basically everyone asked him to share the album, and he did. He originally provided a mega link, then he made one for YouTube. That YouTube page is now gone, but it has since been re-uploaded, so if you want to check this album out, make sure to check out his YouTube. Apparently this album is from 2000, and this is still the only copy that we have. When listening to the music, ironically, it is not death metal at all, and is instead a mix of lo-fi and indie rock. But there's a catch, of course. The entire album has very heavy distortion present in every second of every track. It is like this because it's a 17-year-old CD that is deteriorating. The thing is though, is that most will agree that this distortion adds a ton to the project. It gives us this haunting yet beautiful feeling that would simply not be present without the distortion. And with all that set up, it's time for me to attempt to figure out 2 things. First, when was this made? And by who? When doing this, I'm going to attempt to kill 2 birds with 1 stone and answer both questions at the same time, since it's going to be easier to explain everything that way. So without further ado, let's do this. Now, I know it's already been stated that this album was made in the year 2000, but how can we really prove that? That's right, we can't. For all we know, the person who uploaded this album could have made it himself in just 2016. So the first thing I did was I analyzed the cover to see if anything was contradictory. My first step in doing this was to see where this album cover's image came from.
And when doing that, I found that this girl on the cover is from a manga called Mint Nabukura, which luckily doesn't contradict anything, since this manga ran its course between the years of 1997 to 2000, which means that this cover lines up with the date of the album perfectly. A lot of people still think that the anonymous user who first shed light onto this album is the creator, though, as like I explained earlier, there was literally no information at all about this album online before he made his post. It's also an album that does align with what a lot of people on 4chan happen to like, so it's entirely possible that he created this oddball experimental album and put it on 4chan, since that is the one place he expected people to really like it. But then, why would he lie about it? Why couldn't he just be upfront and say that he made it and wanted to share it? And honestly, I don't really know. You guys are welcome to explain why you think he'd do that in the comment section below. One thing that does steer people away from that anonymous user making it is the back of the album cover does actually list the 4 members of Panchiko, and they are as follows: Owain, Andy, Sean, and John. There's also the distortion that we mentioned earlier, which, well, yeah, it could have been intentional since a lot of the members on 4chan Music Board love experimentation in their music. It does sound pretty legit. Of course, it is possible to fake this, but it really sounds genuine to me. This has led a lot of people to think that some kids in a secondary school back in the late 90s created this album, and it naturally had limited copies, so it never really went anywhere. Once again, this is a claim that doesn't have direct evidence, but it really does make sense and would explain why there aren't any other copies that we know of. So, in conclusion, this is the file that is tough because of the lack of information on the subject. Tons of claims were made here, but none of them really had evidence to back them up. I personally think that this album really is this old, since the distortion sounds genuine to me among other small things that were mentioned earlier. But as for who made it, I have absolutely no idea, and I'm not sure we're ever really going to be able to find out. That's why this file will remain a mystery. Panchikos Deathmetal was an album that was uploaded to 4chan in 2016. It featured this gorgeous, unique, distorted sound, but no other copy of it had ever surfaced. This led us to attempt to figure out a couple of things. Was this album really from 2000, or was this in fact the OP's album? If it wasn't, who made it and why aren't there any more copies at all? Our attempts to answer these questions resulted in theorization and ultimately didn't resolve anything, but we at least hoped that our video spread awareness to this incredibly interesting piece of music. But today, I have some very good news for you all. Not only did we answer all those aforementioned questions, but we answered even more than that. I'm incredibly happy to say that this mystery has finally been put to rest, and I'd like to quickly thank the Death Metal Discord server for making this possible. Seriously, these people grouped together and put together some of the most impressive research I've ever seen, and honestly deserve a standing ovation. But with all that being said, let's get into the meat of this. So, was this album truly released in 2000? Yes, it was. It feels very satisfying to finally know when this album was created, but let's go over how this is all found out. It all started with that original image of the album. Somebody realized that the numbers on the album actually showed him the exact store, which was in the UK. With Owain being a pretty rare name, somebody attempted to contact every single Owain they could find in the area, and they actually found him. Owain mentions that the album was never meant to sound that way, and like us, he actually likes that sound. He says that he doesn't think he has a copy, but is going to try and get in contact with the other members of the band again, and he did. He got Andy the guitarist and Sean the bassist to hop into Discord and answer a few questions, the most notable of which being the fact that there was actually another EP they worked on called Kicking Cars. Anyways, at this point the main goal was for them to get their hands on an actual copy of the album, which did end up happening, but before that we have to address something. Probably the most controversial moment of our video came when we were discussing the possibility of disc rot. We got tons of comments from people saying that disc rot was in fact not real, but we think that you guys that said that should take a look at what this Discord user had to say about that. This person has a 20-year-old colossal collection of CDs, and uploads a lot of them to YouTube, and he gave a couple examples of disc rot in his collection, one of which sounds scarily similar to Panchiko. Take a listen. Yeah, I gotta say, that sounds pretty close, and he goes into more detail later on. He says that most of the discs that sound this way have a printed sticker label that covers the whole surface. He thinks that the chemicals in the glue are probably destroying the data layer, among other factors such as moisture or ink. And here's what completely backs up his theory. You know how the original band members were attempting to find a copy of that album? Well, they did, and guess what? The album had a printed sticker label. So with all of this information, we know now that yes, the album was truly released in 2000, meaning that the original poster did really just find it in a store, and it wasn't actually his album. Despite what many thought, disc rot is actually a thing, and the original poster's version of it suffered heavily. We even actually found out why they decided to name themselves Panchiko, and apparently it was all a typo. They were actually going to be naming themselves Panchinko after the slot machine, but they made a typo and it ended up being Panchiko. For the question of why weren't there any more copies around, Andy said that he definitely didn't make more than 20 or 30, and they weren't sold, just given out for review, friends, and A&R purposes, which are the parts of a record label responsible for talent scouting. So yeah, as it turns out, this truly was just a group of teenagers in the late 90s that made an album that accidentally became a cult classic years later. With everything we found out through the incredible Discord server, we can officially call this mystery debunked. Before we go, we actually have some amazing news. Andy did mention that he works as a mastering engineer and has some good restoration software. And as we showed earlier, he was actually able to get his hands on an album because someone he knew still had one, so after all these years, we can actually hear the original album. While the bit crushing added a ton to the project, hearing the album in its original form is still a huge treat too. It's on YouTube and Bandcamp. It also even has the songs from Kicking Cars, their other EP, on it, so definitely make sure to check it out. Nothing is better than the 80s. The neon era, the decade of dance, punk music, parachute pants, movies, and of course, toys. The 80s are nothing without their toys. He-Man, Star Wars, My Little Pony, G.I. Joe, Care Bears, and of course, the Transformers. The Autobots versus the Decepticons. It's a timeless tale, one many generations have enjoyed and will enjoy for years to come. And it's safe to say that the Transformers animated series brought its popularity to unprecedented levels and was a key player in the franchise's steady rise in notability. As we stated, the show was originally basically a giant commercial, but in the hearts of many, it wound up being so much more than that. What this show had was lovable characters and an endless amount of charm, and because of that, it has a hardcore fan base that is just as strong today as it was 30 years ago when it came out. The Transformers animated series premiered in 1984 to boost toy sales, and well, obviously, it succeeded. The show was produced by both Sunbow and Marvel and was animated by two animation studios. There was Toei, the primary studio, and then there was ACOM, the secondary. The Transformers animated series had 4 seasons, and that wound up being 98 episodes in total over a 3-year run. The animation studio Toei was responsible for all of Season 1's 13 episodes and 39 episodes of the second season's 49. ACOM stepped in and helped work on 3 episodes in Season 2, but over the years, fans realized that this left 7 episodes completely untouched and unaccounted for. Now, these episodes are not lost, as they exist and are widely available to watch by anyone, but nobody knows who made them, and that's what we're here to get to the bottom of. First, I want to clarify how you can tell Toei's animation work from ACOM's. Toei's quality was slightly better than ACOM's and was the pinnacle of the show. Toei and ACOM would both subcontract different studios, which makes identifying each episode's creator nearly impossible, but it's safe to bet which company made which episode or hired subcontractors to do so, especially since Toei actually created a list of every episode they worked on. As mentioned before, ACOM and all of its sub-studios featured lower quality and was overall slightly choppier than Toei and their sub-studios, so it's easy to see which ones they made. But with the Mystery Company episodes, the drop in quality is even worse than ACOM's, and it's easy to tell which 7 were made by them. As a side note, to make things easier, going forward, we'll just call this Mystery Company UC, Unknown Company. So our first task is to figure out who or what UC is, which company it could have been, but we have to look at our evidence. All of UC's episodes have old and outdated character models, which were not seen after these episodes and have not been seen in quite a while. In an interview in 2002, the series production coordinator Paul Davids referred to a third studio claiming it would be used a few times and was located in the Philippines. The only Filipino animation studio at the time was Optifex, who worked for Sunbow and Burbank Animation, who did things like My Little Pony and Gem and the Holograms. With that being said though, Optifex has nothing about Transformers on any of their resumes. Another possible contender I've seen thrown around quite often is Toei's Filipino branch, which actually didn't exist until 1986, which was well after the UC episodes were made, making that one easily debunked. As for Burbank, I saw a thread where someone actually messaged a former animator of Burbank, and this person responded by saying, "We didn't do any Transformers shows at Burbank." Optifex isn't off the hook just yet though. While looking through the UC episodes, the frequently used outdated character models look a lot more similar to the original comics. A few notable examples being Grapple's normally orange colored helmet being colored black in a UC episode, which was a lot closer to the black helmeted comic counterpart. And this trend continues with Astro Train in another UC episode. The normal animated Astro Train wore a purple helmet and excluded the shoulder wheels, but in the UC episode, they included both his comic silver helmet and included his shoulder wheels. This might seem like quite a stretch, but the trend of comic-looking characters continues in all of the UC episodes, especially since these were minor characters that weren't shown very often. Optifex actually worked very closely with Marvel, and wouldn't you know, Marvel also produced the Transformers comics. These are a lot of very strange coincidences that lead me to believe that Optifex was tasked to make a few quick, cheap episodes with older models and base them off of the designs and colors they had in-house. It's safe to say this is debunked, until we get any information otherwise. I'm pretty confident in calling this unknown company Optifex. There aren't really any other leads on UC, so if it's not Optifex, it's some completely unknown company that we have no hunches or anything on other than it being produced in the Philippines. However, one popular theory I've seen floating around is that Paul David misspoke or made a mistake when he talked about the Filipino company. If that's true and it turns out to be a complete mishap, and the strange mysterious company was never even from there, that would open up thousands of possibilities and might make this impossible to solve. Again, my conclusion is Optifex, but things could change at any moment in time, with new records and documents coming out. If you do happen to find a convincing lead on a non-Filipino company, be sure to comment it down below. But it doesn't stop there. There is a strange episode in Season 3 titled Call of the Primitives that looks nothing like any of the other Transformers episodes and is believed to be made by a company called Tokyo Movie Shinsa, or TMS for short. They have worked on tons of famous animation, including the likes of Lupin III and Bakugan. The only tie TMS has to Transformers is creating backgrounds for Transformers Cybertron, which was a separate show from 2005. And one off-color comment from a staff member in a Sega game called Burning Rangers, who mentioned the company's alleged involvement with the episode. There's nothing that inherently disproves it, and there's no one from Hasbro, Toei, Sunbow, or Marvel of that matter that denounces TMS's involvement. And TMS isn't a small, inexperienced company like Optifex was at the time. As we said, TMS was working on some of the most famous animated shows and continues to do so. The quality of the episode would match up with TMS's apparent involvement, but there is something that could contradict my theory that TMS was actually responsible, and that is the fact that TMS actually worked on another Transformers show as previously mentioned earlier. So the dev that worked on the Sega game working for TMS, who mentioned the involvement with the 1984 Transformers show, could possibly be mistaking it for the other Transformers show, Transformers Cybertron, which again is confirmed and well known that TMS created and was involved with. But there's another company that might even be more likely. You see, when there was a discussion on Twitter revolving around who the director of this episode was, a Transformers animator named Ieji Suganuma actually chimed in, saying that he was the animation director for that episode, and from various things he said, it led us to a company called Ashi Productions, who not only was fresh off animating a super similarly styled show called Dankuga in 1985, but they were also a proven subcontractor for Toei. So, it appears for this specific episode, we have an answer. But we still have 2 more episodes from Season 3 to discuss, and these are perhaps the most mysterious of them all. The episodes are Starscream's Ghost and Only Human. These 2 episodes were widely accepted as Toei animated episodes until 1999, due to the animation being far superior than that of ACOM. Toei only produced 13 of the episodes for Season 3, and the numbers weren't adding up, so the episodes were in an animation limbo up until last year, when we got old documents revealing it was originally supposed to be done by ACOM, but the episodes looked much weirder than any others in Season 3, using outdated colors and models for many characters. ACOM used tons of sub-companies as mentioned at the beginning, but all the sub-companies used the same reference material and matched with all the other ACOM episodes. So this one being completely different is extremely odd. We truly have no idea who this sub-company could have been, and there are absolutely no leads. But who knows, the origins of this episode's creator may still be leaked someday, as this mystery seems to continue to this day with fans searching far and wide to find answers. Those are what we call the Mysterious 9. 9 very strange G1 Transformers episodes that look nothing like anything we have seen after or before it. It's a truly strange mystery, and one that could still be solved someday due to the fans' immense interest in it. I'm very confident in my declaration of debunking the first unknown company as Optifex, but I'm very unsure about TMS and their involvement with Call of the Primitives, and those last 2 episodes are truly anyone's guess as of now, leaving our final rating to be close but definitely not debunked. As we said, anything could change at any time, and if you have any theories or think we have any holes in our theories, make sure to let us know. We also eagerly await answers to this mystery that is truly more than meets the eye. For our first edition of this year's Debunktober, we're going to be talking about what we love more than anything else in the world: Universal monsters. And really, what's not to love? Macabre sets, eerie acting, and atmosphere so thick you can feel the smog and smoke emerge from your TV until you're submerged in the darkness and glued to the silver screen. Perfect for this time of year. As the years went on, horror began to evolve. By the 50s, gone were the days of the vampire and werewolf. It was a creature fest. With the advent of space travel and the interest in technology increased, horror movies became less about gothic horror and more about the terror that lurked in the stars and in science. Mutants and aliens became the new hit horror fad, and with Universal being the king of horror, they needed to adapt to maintain their status. That's why in 1954, they created a mutant monster flick called The Creature from the Black Lagoon, starring Julie Adams, Ben Chapman, and Rico Browning, playing the creature on land and underwater respectively. As a crazy fun fact, as of this recording, Rico Browning is still one of the last few Universal Monsters actors still alive at the ripe age of 90 years old. The film was of course a success, and truly birthed the horror sci-fi drive-in phenomena. It gained 2 sequels. There was Revenge of the Creature in 1955, and The Creature Walks Among Us in 1956. That was the last we saw of Gilman in his own movies, but he did make an appearance in The Monster Squad and The Munsters. With all of that said, everything changed for our friend Gilman when the 1990s rolled around. In 1999, the Mummy reboot opened to an insane success, which naturally greenlit a reboot for our beloved Gilman. Gary Ross was set to write and produce the film, but it never happened. As you will see, this will become a very common theme throughout this whole video. You see, there hasn't been a reboot of the Creature movie ever, and they've been in talks since the 80s. So today we're going to pick apart each failed attempt at a reboot, and trust me, there's a lot, and find out why they never made it into cinemas. Let's begin. In 1982, we had our first confirmed report of a Creature from the Black Lagoon reboot being made. Jack Arnold, the director of the original 1954 film, was set to direct alongside John Landis with Nigel Neal as the writer. This story and the first known failed attempt at a Creature reboot is pretty straightforward, but it's definitely worth mentioning. Neal had finished the script, which centered around two Gillmen, one good and one evil, being attacked by the Navy, and it was set to film in 3D, which was the big kicker. Universal had no incentive to film this movie in 3D, and due to Jaws 3D in production, they didn't want the films to clash and possibly split the box office earnings, which could doom both films. The budget concerns were there as well. Universal knew that Jaws would work, but unfortunately were unsure of Creature, and it seemed the popularity of 3D faded once again. That was a big drawing point, and also, Arnold did not want to come back due to his involvement with the Love Boat series, so the movie was never made and the first attempt was canned, until 1992. In 1992, the second failed attempt, and probably the most famous, was set to be directed by the legend himself, John Carpenter, who in fact knew a thing or two about reboots done right, as he directed The Thing, which was a remake of the 50s B-movie classic, The Thing from Another World. Anyways, Carpenter was assigned by Universal with another film legend, Rick Baker, to do the makeup effects, and Bill Phillips was assigned to write the script. This seemed like the obvious choice for a Creature reboot. The talent is here, and we know how well it could work, especially with Carpenter being a veteran in the horror genre, as his name alone could have elicited a huge box office draw. So why it was never given a green light is baffling. Now though, it's time to find out why this possible classic was never put to film. Carpenter faded into obscurity after the success of Halloween, and he mainly worked on cult films. The Thing, while an absolute classic now, wasn't successful and was hated by most general audiences. Actor Chevy Chase wanted Carpenter to direct the horror comedy Memoirs from an Invisible Man, which did pretty crappy, but it was big enough and hadn't come out yet, possibly giving Carpenter another shot at more expensive projects. He settled on, of course, a remake of Creature. His plan was to make it almost Lovecraftian in style, drawing beats from Shadow of Innsmouth, and with Rick Baker as the makeup artist and production designer, things like that were possible. A maquette does exist. It lies in Carpenter's horror man cave, as seen in a documentary about the director's life and films. Unfortunately, as mentioned, Memoirs from an Invisible Man was a total flop, and that's the main reason most people point to when asking why this potentially amazing film never got the go-ahead. The film was in limbo, either waiting to start shooting or waiting to be cancelled, and neither happened. Universal failed to give it any recognition, and the movie was kicked. With Carpenter gone and Rick Baker waiting for a new director, they chose Ivan Reitman of Ghostbusters fame, who didn't agree with Baker's idea of the Creature and started to make it more monster than man, but we'll get back to Reitman's involvement later. There are many theories as to why this movie never got made. As mentioned, the failure of Memoirs of an Invisible Man, Carpenter's fall from grace from hotshot to cult filmmaker, or Universal's neglect for the entire project leading to Carpenter's impatience and leave to work on other things. And honestly, I think it's a little bit of all of them. On one hand, it's not Carpenter's fault that Memoirs of an Invisible Man failed, but it showed executives at Universal that the general public wanted nothing to do with classic monsters, which ties into Universal's complete blind eye to the whole Creature project at all. And of course, there was Carpenter's impatience. He did make a movie 2 years later, so it seems he was either going to devote time to the reboot or get back to filmmaking. It's near impossible to pinpoint which it could have been, but again, I think it's safe to say a little bit of all fed into the Creature reboot being dropped. Until 1995. In 1995, writers Herschel Weingrod and Timothy Harris proposed a script to Universal, which we can assume they liked because they were now looking for a director, and they looked at none other than Peter Jackson. This is another straightforward one here, but worth mentioning. So, to make a long story short, Jackson had no interest in the project and instead expressed interest in making a King Kong movie, which eventually, in 2005, he did. But 2 years later, he made his classic Lord of the Rings series. This makes sense. Jackson had a vision and knew what he wanted to do. If this film did happen, we might not have had the Lord of the Rings or 2005's King Kong. So, it's safe to say that I'm kinda glad this one stayed in the vault. So yes. Another Creature reboot canned, and I know what you're all thinking. Yes, until 1996. In 1996, the aforementioned Ivan Reitman, director of the Ghostbusters movies, was up to helm the reboot, but that's pretty much all we know. He was going to do it, and he didn't. It's just common knowledge that's tossed around when talking about the failed reboots. On my hunt to find anything, I only ever found passing comments about his alleged involvement. It's a complete mystery if he was ever even set to direct. The script was to be the same one that Carpenter was working from, just Reitman directing. It might have just been an idea in Universal's brain, but it's obvious they had no interest, so maybe Carpenter recommended him. It's nearly impossible to pinpoint anything about Reitman's involvement. No matter how deep I dig, I kept hitting a brick. Maybe one day we'll get an answer, but I think our answer may lie in a deep lagoon somewhere. And that was the end of the Creature reboot, of course, until 1999. We now circle back from where we started, with the success of the 1999 movie The Mummy. Seeing a reboot of an old monster movie done in an almost Indiana Jones action-adventure style made Universal start second-guessing their distaste in a new Creature movie. We talked about this at the very beginning, but to recap, the movie was set to be written and produced by Gary Ross. The script in question seemed to either be done or roughly done, because the plot was there and had been stated as a clash between civilized men and primitive men. Going with a more action route, the film would include a huge epic battle set piece like The Mummy, instead of relying on slow burn horror that made the original so scary at the time. It was in 2001 that Ross signed on for a remake, and obviously it never happened. But in 2008 in a Q&A, Collider asked Ross about specifics on the project, and he had this to say. "What's going on with the Creature from the Black Lagoon?"
I'm producing it. We're actually moving forward.
"What's the tone of it gonna be?"
It's not going to be campy. It's not a reference to what the original was. It's not reverential that way. We take it seriously. We found some scientific underpinnings for it, which my dad actually found in the original. He based it on a lungfish he found around that time. A lot of that was his. We're not approaching it in a campy, retro sort of way.
Is it going to be based on the original and the sequels?
Well, it's certainly going to be based on the original. My dad's favorite was The Creature Walks Among Us, and that was the last one which my dad also wrote. My dad actually died 2 weeks ago. We're going to be faithful to it.
Does it have a director yet?
That hasn't been decided yet.
Will the Creature be live or CGI?
Well, those are decisions that will always be made during prep. The movie is not greenlit, let me say that. But we hope to be making it sometime next year.
Is it going for scares though?
Oh yeah, I don't think we're going to wink at the audience or make it silly in any way. I think we're going to take it seriously.
It really looks like Ross was going to take this film very seriously and was really looking forward to getting a director on board and getting started. This was the last we heard about it from Ross, as it's been over a decade, and of course, there's no reboot to be found. Ross's vision would have surely been interesting, so it's a real shame it never made it to the screen. The take was fresh enough, and Ross surely had a ton of respect for the original, so it's safe to say this could have been a hit, or even a cult classic. But why did this get canned? God, I have no clue. Especially with the success of The Mummy, this should have been an absolute no-brainer. It would have made money regardless if it was bad. I'm really starting to think these attempts are somehow cursed. And yes, this was the last attempt, until 2002. Bear with me on this one here, because it might sound a bit familiar. Regardless, in 2002, Guillermo del Toro was attached to direct a new reboot after years of failure. And again, this seems like a no-brainer. Del Toro was a huge fan of the original and monster movies in general. Del Toro presented the idea of a more romantic movie focusing on the creature's love for the woman, a true Beauty and Beast story. Universal wasn't a fan of the very abstract idea and dropped him, but Del Toro isn't done yet. He'll be back. The reboot was picked up by writer Teddy Serafian, and the script was set to start writing in March of 2003. 2 years later, in 2005, the movie found a director. Breck Eisner. Eisner wanted a very Alien in the Thing-esque story for the creature, and making the Gillman's origin tied to pollution and corruption. Unfortunately, during this time, which is around 2007 to 2008, the writer's strike happened, halting all production on the reboot. Eisner decided to finish his film, The Crazies, and then go back to Creature when that was over and done for. When it came time to film, it was decided to film in Brazil and on the Amazon River in Peru, right on location with minimal CGI. Allegedly, a boat set from the movie exists, but the evidence of that is scarce. The script was being retooled, and it was looking like we might finally get our Creature from the Black Lagoon movie, and just like that, it stopped. It was gone forever, until of course, in 2009. In 2009, it was thrown around that a movie called The Black Lagoon was being made, a reboot with a retooled name that would be produced by Mark Abraham and Gary Ross. By 2011, the film was abandoned and would continue into 2012. In 2012, we had a semi-dark universe creature movie again titled The Black Lagoon. Universal hired Dan Kajganich to write the film for a 2014 March release. And, well, it never came out. It was tried again by seemingly the same crew, but this time with big-name actors like Chris Evans and Scarlett Johansson. This reboot was set to appear on the scene in 2020, which obviously hasn't happened. Yet. As of recording, we still have a few months left of 2020, so anything can really happen, but without a trailer or any news, I highly doubt it. Going back a few years to 2017, we finally had our Creature reboot. Well, sort of. If at least you count Guillermo del Toro's masterpiece, The Shape of Water, which took the concept of the original with a sympathetic, albeit dull creature, into a sympathetic and monstrous, but extremely intelligent, loving monster. It's a great film and really serves as a reboot or even a sequel to the original. Alas, it's not canon and not recognized as a universal picture. So it's up to you where you can put this movie. And that's it, the complete history of the oddity that seems to be the Creature from the Black Lagoon remake. Will it ever see the light of day from the depths of the murky lagoon? Maybe. With the release and success of Universal's The Invisible Man, I think it's very safe to say that the dark universe is back, baby, and I think Creature might crawl his way out soon. The world of video games. Vast, bright, alluring sounds, colors, and atmosphere. Simply put, it's an experience of which nothing else can compare. From the days of old to now, video games are a landmark in creative and technical vision. Classic systems like the Nintendo Entertainment System, the Atari 2600, and of course, the godfather, the Magnavox Odyssey. There were many systems over many decades that defined a generation. You think of the 80s, you think of the aforementioned Atari 2600, and of course, the Nintendo Entertainment System. The 90s? That was ruled by the infamous console war between the Super Nintendo and the Sega Genesis, and by the end of the decade, we made the leap to 3D graphics. But what about the systems that never were? The Sega Neptune, Magnavox Odyssey 3, the Atari Cosmos, Atari's Game Brain. These are all systems that for one reason or another never managed to come to fruition. Granted, with all of these consoles, we understand the tech and what they would have been, but there's one that stands out among the rest, that being the Atari Mirai. Before we can even talk about the Mirai, we need to set the stage for Atari and its competitors at the time. At the very beginning of Atari's lifespan with the 2600, there was competition, but in the simplest of terms, they ruled the industry. Even though rival consoles at the time like the Intellivision and the ColecoVision were more impressive graphically, it simply didn't matter. The Atari 2600 had this specific magic quality to it that stole the hearts of millions, and this magic is still able to be felt even when playing it today, all these years later. By the mid-80s though, things began to change. The NES came out to explosive success, quite literally saving the entire video game industry, and the Atari 2600 was simply left to the dust in comparison to this new kid on the block. Atari didn't give up without a fight though. In response to the NES, they came out with a new console, the Atari 7800. This console featured graphics that were significantly improved in comparison to the 2600, and the 5200, which isn't even worth speaking about. Despite this though, gamers at the time were still able to see that it just couldn't compare. It featured the same sound chip as the Atari 2600, which, while I absolutely love those charming sound effects now, it simply was behind the times and people weren't interested in it. More importantly than the sound though, were the games. The Atari 2600 games were all about getting a high score, which was great for the time, but the NES came around with games that were actually beatable, and unfortunately, the majority of the 7800 games were still about reaching a high score, which again gave it the feeling of just being behind the times. For all of these reasons, the 7800 also failed heavily. Then the 90s came around. Nintendo was booming with their aforementioned NES, and the SNES was just hitting the shelves. Sega was killing the market with their Genesis system, pitting two giants together, while on the other side of the year, Atari was, well, slowly falling apart. Attempting to capitalize on Nintendo's success with their handheld Game Boy, Atari released the Atari Lynx, which for the time was actually a pretty stellar handheld. But unfortunately, it couldn't even compare to the Game Boy's notoriety and convenience no matter how hard it tried. By the year 1992, Atari released the Atari Jaguar to pretty middling success. This was mostly due to the fact that it had to compete with the insane popularity of the SNES, which by 1992 was already owned by most kids who lived and breathed Nintendo. And those who didn't knew that Sega Genesis did what Nintendo don't. Oh, and it didn't help much either that the Jaguar was terrible. Believe it or not, despite being against those remarkable odds, the Jaguar actually had a phenomenal marketing campaign that had people excited for it. At this time in the industry, essentially every console featured 16-bit graphics, but the Jaguar was boasting as featuring 64-bit graphics. That's what the Nintendo 64 featured, but the Jaguar came out many years before that. When people got their hands on the Jaguar, they realized that only a few games actually took advantage of these 64-bit capabilities. People found out that many of the games were extremely mundane and also saw this absolute behemoth of a controller. All of this and more left it gasping for air and then suddenly sputtering out as Atari's last true console. This left the Atari company to lose a lot of their stock and tons of money. Many offices were emptied, and this brings us to the Atari Mirai. In 1996, deep in an Atari office lay dormant the Atari Mirai. Nothing but a shell. The Mirai was a complete mystery. As previously mentioned, a lot of cancelled consoles, including some from Atari, were shells with hardware attached, and this is usually commonplace. We knew what they were supposed to be and how they would run, look, and behave, but not the Mirai. With nothing but a shell of a seemingly one-of-a-kind decaying console, it seems like the trail might end here, but of course, that is far from the case. The mystery only gets bigger. Looking at the console itself, many extreme video game enthusiasts had a theory that it might have been Atari's take on the spectacular console, the Neo Geo, which is a console we here at Debunk File have pretty publicly shown our appreciation for. The timeline adds up. The Neo Geo, made by SNK, was released in 1990 and was ridiculously expensive, leading to the console not really going anywhere. It seems the Mirai was going to capitalize on the complete, authentic arcade experience offered with the Neo Geo at a much more affordable price. This would make sense as the name Mirai, when translated to English, means future, the future of video games. Speaking of, the Japanese titling is the only time Atari has ever done anything like this, as previous console names were based on either numerics or cats. This also would add up, as SNK was a Japanese company. There was also the console slot. As you can see, it's huge. The Neo Geo was known for having giant cartridges, so this of course sheds a lot of light into this possibility. Something else that adds more stability to SNK's involvement is the fact that Atari had been confirmed to have worked with multiple companies and even SNK themselves in the past. Yeah, for those of you who didn't know, in the years of 1983 to 1984, Atari actually had a deal with Nintendo to bring the Nintendo Famicom to America, but under Atari's own name. This would obviously fall apart and never happen, but it does show that Atari had a history of collaboration. They also tried to do this with Sega, and that never happened either. As for them working with SNK in the past, they both worked on porting SNK's classic arcade game, Ikari Warriors. The one final extremely important information worth noting here is that in California, there was actually both an SNK and Atari office right next to each other. Despite all of this, others would argue against the Neo Geo theory, specifically AtariMuseum.com, which judged the console with its pastel-colored buttons to have been an 80s 16-bit console. Maybe a Jaguar prototype, or a very early design for Atari's other cancelled console, the 32-bit Panther. This theory, however, is easily debunked due to that massive cartridge slot. Searching through the web for info on the Mirai brought me to a few forums discussing the topic, but the main one I saw was assemblergames.com, and the forum based on the Mirai is brilliant. One commenter goes over SNK and Atari having offices right next to each other and were apparently working on a project together. Maybe the Mirai wasn't a clone but a joint project. It's hard to say since that SNK office didn't create any hardware. The next theory about what this console was is slightly similar to the Neo Geo theory, and that is, this console was actually a clone of Atari's home line of computers called the STs. Something that helps to prove this theory would have to be Atari's final console in the 8-bit era. It was called the Atari ZEGS, and well, just look at it. It looks exactly like the Mirai. This console actually was a clone of one of Atari's already existing computer models, that being the Atari 65XE. When looking at this console, you can certainly see it, and it's quite the odd looking console to say the least. Besides the overwhelming similar design when it comes to its coloring and buttons on the front, this console featured both a cartridge slot and a keyboard, essentially giving it the appearance of some sort of Frankenstein monster. So could the Atari Mirai have been another version of this console? Perhaps an upgraded model of it for the 16-bit generation instead of the 8-bit? I'd say it seems pretty possible. This just leaves us with the question of the huge console slot yet again. That would bring us back to SNK, as their connections to this as established are pretty set in stone. So if this theory is legit, the Atari Mirai would essentially be a 16-bit version of the Atari ZEGS, and to help with that, they called forth the SNK. This theory combines our joint project theory and adds more context to it, and I honestly find it very possible. It's frankly impossible to ever prove this without a shadow of the doubt, especially since this canned console just has so little information to it. But with working with what we have, this is the best we can come up with. Further questions you could ask are what the game library would have been like if this theory is in fact true, and for that, we could only speculate. A more affordable console with Neo Geo capabilities would be mouth-watering to us. Would the games function like that and also be arcade-styled, or would they try to modernize it by making the games actually beatable like its competitors? If they went with the latter and they featured Neo Geo level graphics, I can't even imagine how great the Mirai could have been. Or is none of this at all true because we're completely wrong? Unfortunately, we'll never know. The only lead that I am extremely certain about would have to be SNK's involvement. While it was never confirmed, the sheer amount of evidence leaning in that direction is just way too much to ignore. With all of that said though, that's why it's one of gaming's greatest mysteries. On July 30th, 1996, Atari went defunct. What once was the top innovator in gaming was now unable to adapt with the times and faded out, while the rest of the world went on. The tale of the company is tragic, and because of that, we'll likely never receive our answers regarding this console here. What if the Mirai was truly something game-changing, but they just were unable to release it due to past failures? Or perhaps even more disappointing, what if it too was flawed? All we can do at this point is imagine. The human mind likes focusing on the negatives, but for Atari, we aren't going to do that. In our hearts, we want to remember them as pioneers, the creators of the first truly great gaming console, and the company responsible for the popularization of the entire concept of home video gaming in the first place. For the company's grand finale, they left us with one of the greatest gaming mysteries of all time. Look, it's no secret, both Jiff and I are in love with music, and likely wouldn't last a day without it. We've covered a few music mysteries in the past, and they all revolved around fascinating deep dives through time and music history. And today, this one is no different, As a result, we're going to take that dive once again and delve into the catacombs of a mystery surrounding the Wu-Tang Clan. That's right, attached to the most famous hip-hop group of all time is a mystery that almost nobody knows about. This was particularly shocking to us because we are both huge Wu-Tang fans and didn't even know of this subject here until rather recently, and it is quite the doozy. Without further ado, let's simply just get right into it. This is the mystery of Once Upon a Time in Shaolin. In the early 1990s, hip-hop became a household phenomenon. While first established in the radio world in the late 70s, it steadily gained popularity throughout the 80s, and then became a force at the turn of the next decade. The coolest thing about hip-hop to me was seeing how it evolved and changed through time, and this is something that still reigns true to this day. Artists would continually come through and do something different, and in 1993, one of the most infamous cases of this occurred. From Staten Island, the Forgotten Borough, a supergroup emerged, and they sounded absolutely nothing like anything that had ever come before it. This group was, of course, the Wu-Tang Clan, and their album Enter the Wu-Tang 36 Chambers took the world by storm and blew minds. Commended for its aggressive tone, dark and obscure sample usage, and gritty lyricism, there quite literally had never been something on this entire planet to ever sound quite like this. Normally, that could actually result in commercial failure, since that much experimentation may scare away the average consumer, but that was not at all the case here. It was a critical gem, and it was a massive commercial success too, as it reached number 8 on the hip-hop/R&B chart, and number 40 on the overall 200, but it would only get more famous through time. Usually when you have such a massive group like this, a lot of the members aren't going to stand out too much, and may be slightly forgettable. It's the type of thing where if you were asked to name every member of a group, you might forget some people. But with Wu-Tang, that absolutely will never happen. Each member just had such a distinct style and delivery, there's truly never been anything like it. What the group did next in regards to releases isn't necessarily important to this mystery at hand, but what is important is discussing all the members of the group and how affiliates would be added over time, and that's why we're mentioning it. Basically, the group had 10 official members, but then there wouldn't be a number of affiliates. These affiliates weren't official members of Wu-Tang, but they were extremely close with them, and would appear consistently on many Wu-Tang releases. The biggest example of this would definitely be Redman. As it turns out, there was one affiliate by the name of Silva Rings, and this is where our mystery begins. Silva Rings is a rapper/producer from the Netherlands, and he's got quite the story to his name. He actually grew up as an extreme fan of the Wu-Tang Clan, and his ultimate goal in life was to either become an NBA player or get a recording contract with Wu-Tang, and against all odds, the latter would become true. During a Wu-Tang concert in 1997, they announced towards the end that they would be taking freestyles for local talent, and Silva Rings was actually here, so he of course pounced in and took the mic. His freestyle would actually wind up catching the attention of the entire clan, and through a series of events, he would actually be signed to Wu-Tang Records 2 years later. Upon joining, he mostly served as the opener to a ton of these Wu-Tang concerts, but of course, he would eventually create his own music. In 2007, he dropped a critically acclaimed album, but that is not the one we will be talking about today. The mystery today revolves around the album he began working on immediately afterwards. The album was to be titled Once Upon a Time in Shaolin, and according to Silva Rings, it would be a complete throwback to the original Wu-Tang sound that he grew up with, which by this point, the clan really hadn't dabbled with in a while. With being an affiliate, this would obviously sound official, as not only would he have official production backing him, but he'd get all the Wu-Tang features he could possibly ask for. This sounded absolutely incredible to fans at the time, and as a result, it quickly built some hype, but then, things would start getting weird. It turned out that the album was not to be released, at least, not in the traditional way. There was only one copy of the entire album placed inside of this case, and it would be sold to the highest bidder. The first question to ask already here is, why? Why was it being sold this way? And luckily for us, at least for this portion of the mystery, the answer is right here for us. On the website of the album, they describe it all.
The music industry is in crisis. The intrinsic value of music has been reduced to zero. Contemporary art is worth millions by virtue of its exclusivity. By adopting a 400-year-old Renaissance-style approach to music, offering it as a commissioned commodity and allowing it to take a similar trajectory from creation to exhibition to sale, we hope to inspire and intensify urgent debates about the future of music.
So there's our answer in this regards. The album basically served as a commentary on the consumption of mass amounts of music through streaming services and how this devalues music, at least in their eyes. Regardless of how you feel about their piece of commentary here, the album was actually sold for $2 million. This made it the single most expensive piece of music ever made. It was sold to a man named Martin Shkreli, and there was a contract, and in it, it stated that the album would only be able to be commercially exploited in the year 2103. To wrap up this insane story here, it also ends with another wild happening. In 2018, Martin Shkreli was actually convicted for security fraud, and a federal court seized all of his assets, and this includes the album. That's right, even on the official website, it is now said that as of September 2020, the United States Department of Justice are the ones in possession of this album. Now that this utterly insane story is out of the way, it's time to go over the largest mystery at hand, and it's one that may cause your heart to skip. That is, was the album ever even real? Yes, believe it or not, the question of whether there even is an album is a huge debate, so let's go through it. Firstly, we know of the track list of the album. That has always been widely available, and there were supposedly 31 tracks, and they even have all the features listed. Questions arise when you begin thinking though. We never did see inside the case, did we? That's obviously purposeful, as the whole concept behind the album revolves around that fact, but it's still curious. What really got people talking though was an interview with Method Man in which he supposedly called the album fake and BS. This interview quickly blew up as, well, this is one of the main members of the group claiming the album is fake, but taking a further look into exactly what he says debunks that claim. I read the interview, and he didn't call the album fake and BS. Instead, he called Silver Rings a fake Wu-Tang member. Really, the anger actually stems from a payment issue regarding this product. Basically, the Wu-Tang members were paid as if they were appearing on a solo Silver Rings album, not an official Wu-Tang project. There's also a DJ Booth article that labels the entire album as a massive conspiracy. There's a lot to this theory, and while it's not truly integral to the specific question that we're asking, it's still a pretty fascinating read and definitely raises suspicion. However, as stated, it doesn't prove the album as being fake or anything. With that all out of the way, the likelihood that this album is real after all is much higher, and this is for a few reasons. RZA was interviewed by multiple articles regarding this album, and some of them supposedly heard snippets. That is definitely reassuring, but I'd like to look for something even more proving. Luckily, I was able to find just that. Through digging, I was actually able to come across a live stream from Martin Shkreli himself, who played a few snippets from the album. This video all but confirms the album as actually existing, so I'm really glad to have found this discovery.
Once upon a time in Shaolin, the saga continues.
Anyway, that's the intro. I guess you can get a little bit of track 2 too. Why not?
I certified priest, the general, the Maximus, the gladiator, magnificent butcher, warrior, soldier, custom-made blade I swing, heads roll in the trick, so the people's the name I king, left man with the pain I bring, next head to the chair, young Elijah, he on the same.
As for further questioning, many have been curious as to who would have designed this case that the album was placed in, and I don't blame them for that. The case is definitely luxurious and truly added a lot of intrigue into this whole mystery. Luckily for you, the answer is here. This case was made by a company called Yaha. Others also wondered why specifically the album would be widely available specifically in the year 2103. rather than any other year in particular, and this also has an answer. This one comes down to the significance of the number 8 to the Wu-Tang Clan. RZA is a big fan of symbolism and noticed that the number 8 meant a lot to this group. When the group first began, there were 8 members. He explains how the number 8 on its side made out an infinity symbol, and was, as such, used for the cover of Wu-Tang Forever. So basically, the year 2103 was chosen because it was 88 years after the announcement. That about does it for all the mysteries that we at least know of regarding this album. Unfortunately, it appears that we might not ever get to hear this album, unless some of you are still alive in 2103, that is. Overall, this album sports a powerful message about consumerism and the true power of art. Whether or not this message is presented in a way that is genius or utterly pretentious is up for you to decide, but it did culminate in something that we have truly never seen before and will likely never see again. The mystery was vast, and the majority of it was actually solved, but it appears we'll never actually get to give it a listen. Regardless, this was a fantastic deep dive, and I hope you all learned something here today. Halo is back, baby. People are loving Halo Infinite, and personally, I've been going through the Halo games. At time of recording, I'm playing Halo ODST, and it really seems like we're going through another Halo renaissance, and not even we can escape the hype. Spartan toys are back on shelves, Master Chief is appearing on soda cans again, and of course, everyone is playing the game. But being one of the most famous franchises in video game history, you think that all there is to know about these games are known. But that is in fact not true. What if I told you there were a multitude of Halo games planned that simply never saw the light of day? Today, we figured we'd discuss the varied sets of lost media that the franchise has to offer. Some of these games' stories are understandable, some are fascinating. So, with that being said, simply sit back, relax, grab a 2007 can of Master Chief Mountain Dew, and let's explore the missing Halo media. Starting off bluntly is just Halo DS. This was set to be a port of Halo Combat Evolved on Nintendo's extremely successful handheld. Since 2004, talks were being had of a potential port. Obviously nothing came of them, but they did want to potentially port Halo to the Game Boy Advance, so maybe we got lucky. On January 4th, 2007, Matt Casamina of IGN claimed to have played Halo DS. These were bold proclamations with nothing to show for it, until October of the same year. On that day, Matt Casamina showed off an actual playable version of the game, fighting his friends in the Halo 2 map Zanzibar while dual-wielding submachine guns. It was safe to assume it was based around Halo 2.
Hey guys, it's Matt here with Mark, and we're going to talk about a little game called Halo DS. Unfortunately, for reasons we can't discuss, it never came to be. Obviously, you're not playing it right now. However, we are. This is Halo DS, and you're going to see some better videos on my blog. And you've got basically a multi-card play, a single card play, and a model viewer. We're going to do multi-card play, but
yeah, pretty much right now it's only one level, but you can run around Zanzibar and kick a little ass. Oh shoot!
And I'm probably going to get my butt kicked by Bozon. Oh, sorry Bozon, you die. But there you go. It's it's Halo. It plays like Halo. Looks like Halo, sounds like Halo, yeah, and it's definitely, there's some different control options. I'd like to up the sensitivity on everything a little bit, but all in all, it's pretty good, and it's really unfortunate that this never came to retail, because I think a lot of people really would have been blown away, really would have liked this. I know you are flipping out over it.
Yeah, I'm sick for it. You can dual wield and kill dudes with grenades and then pick up the plasma rifle and go at it.
People were quick to doubt Casamina, and some claimed it was a mod of GoldenEye Rogue Agent. It's hard to determine. The game looks great and seemingly plays great too. For an original DS, it's a really solid looking game. It has all the hallmarks of Halo, and a lot of people credit it looking this good for it actually being real. But is it too good? Casamina doubled down and said, "Wasn't created by a garage developer, it was actually done by a major studio, a major publisher, a AAA publisher." With nothing to back that up, it's still hard to say. Bungie has even commented by saying it's very likely that somebody at some point in time created a prototype and tried to pitch it, which is probably what Casamina is talking about. But there has never been an officially funded or sanctioned development of any sort of DS Halo game. No word from Microsoft on the subject. It definitely would have been an interesting footnote in the Halo franchise, and it is really a shame this game never made it past the inception stage, if it even made it that far. Halo DS sounds pretty cool, but there are ports of classic first-person shooters already. The aforementioned GoldenEye got a release, and the DS had multiple iterations of games in the Call of Duty franchise. Both are fine, but nothing like playing them on a console with a classic controller, of course. I think the game is talked about more now than it would be if it came out. Most of those old DS games are mostly forgotten with some cult fan bases, and it really seems with this specific case, the lost media nature of it is really where the majority of that allure comes from. The next thing we will be exploring is Halo on Sony's iconic PlayStation 2, arguably one of the best consoles ever made. Now I know what you're thinking, it's pretty much impossible for Halo to ever be on any PlayStation consoles, as Halo is owned by Microsoft and had been since 2000, right before Combat Evolved was released. Of course, Halo became a launch title for the original Xbox and cemented the Xbox in the cultural zeitgeist for years to come. However, Halo originally wasn't owned by any major companies, and Bungie wanted to put Combat Evolved on multiple platforms, including the PS2 and Sega Dreamcast. A build for the PS2 was in the works with Rockstar, who owned the original publishing rights for the console version of Halo. During the same year, Bungie was bought out by Microsoft. A German gaming news publisher known as GameStar released a video of gameplay of Halo on the PS2. It looks pretty well done though, and seems to play like normal. Now, this is a similar, but not entirely the same dilemma as Halo DS, as to whether or not this footage is legit. It's safe to say that yes, Halo on PS2 was highly considered prior to Microsoft's acquisition of Bungie, but the gameplay looks sort of sketchy for an earlier build of Halo. After hours of searching, I unfortunately couldn't find the answer I was looking for. I saw a lot of people on the internet call it out as fake, but they have nothing to back up their claims. I saw one person claim it was a PC version, as Halo did run on the Mac back in the day, so it's entirely possible. I did see quite a few people claim that Halo on PS2 did exist, and they remember playing it, but this is untrue, and not even worth adding to the Mandela effect phenomenon. This isn't some reality shifting event, it's just a few people online who remember something that just doesn't exist. Unlike Halo DS, if Halo released on PS2, the gaming landscape as we know it would have been drastically different. Without Halo helping spread the popularity of the Xbox, who knows where we'd be at today. The console war may not even been much of a console war. Maybe Sega would still be making consoles. I'm sure people have made unauthorized ports of Halo on the PlayStation, but those are fan-made and obviously were not sanctioned by Microsoft, Bungie, or 343 Industries. For the next entry in our list, if you're a fan of Halo and the episodic nature of the Telltale games, this is going to sound like a dream come true that unfortunately never saw the light of day. Halo Chronicles was announced on September 27, 2006 at Microsoft's Xbox convention as an episodic Halo adventure, or as they called it, an interactive movie, with the focus being on the story instead of fast-paced FPS action like nearly every other Halo game. Nothing was shown off, not even a logo, which is pretty much all Bethesda shows off these days. Anyways, the game was set to be developed by Peter Jackson and his game studio Wingnut Interactive. Peter Jackson was also in talks with Bungie to produce a Halo film directed by Neil Blomkamp. The only thing that was made for the film was a complete drivable Warthog, which was crashed by Bungie producer Chris Kramer. In Halo Chronicle, players would take control of an unnamed Marine infused with alien technology, with the sole focus to focus on the intimate, personal aspect of a real war. This was definitely a departure from the formula, but a really interesting idea. Shane Kim of Bungie said, "Our deal with Peter is not about a movie person making a game. What we've talked about, and he agrees with, is how we can use live as a medium to introduce episodic interactive storytelling. There's some people in our industry who can tell stories, but they're not Peter Jackson." Kind of mean-spirited, but then again, he is right. Peter Jackson is great at adapting media to film. His biggest franchise, The Lord of the Rings, was already written for him 50 years before he started shooting. After the movie adaptation fell through in 2009, so did Halo Chronicles. It was an interesting effort by both parties, but in the late 2000s, it would have been exciting to see something like this. We have games like this now from Telltale, and if the company were still around, I'd love for them to take a crack at developing a Halo game. However, the story does sort of have a nice ending. Although Chronicle was shelved and the movie fell through, the original team who were set to work on the projects were then brought in to develop Halo 3 ODST, which many consider to be a really good Halo side story that tackles what this game wanted to be in a traditional Halo way. As for the movie, it was always assumed that Neil Blomkamp funneled what they had for Halo into District 9, which was later confirmed by Halo composer Martin O'Donnell. So, thankfully both projects got to live on in their own way and become something that fans and critics could still enjoy. We've covered ports, cross-platform ideas, films, and storytelling games. It was only a matter of time before Bungie decided to make a Halo Massive Multiplayer Online game, or MMO for short. And that's exactly what we're going to discuss. The Halo MMO, codenamed Project Titan, was an idea that started all the way back in 1998, but was finally greenlit in 2004 as production went into effect by Ensemble Studios. And the production scale was pretty massive. $90 million, a 60,000 square foot office, and a 40-person team split between Titan and Halo Wars. It was shaping up to be an incredible endeavor. The early builds of the game resembled World of Warcraft, but as it went on, it started to take drastic changes. Ideas of how it should look and play were thrown around, taking inspiration from Warhammer's online public quests and Star Wars The Old Republic's art style. Microsoft was looking to make this their new thing, and the company's major focus going forward. But 2007 would be the end of Titan, as it was cancelled by Microsoft due to changing management and a focus on a more casual direction for the series. Titan was done for, but the rest of the money and time was poured into Halo Wars exclusively. In 2008, images of Titan surfaced on Flickr from user Gone is Gone. More images surfaced from Ensemble employee Shannon Dees. It's a really pretty looking MMO. Unfortunately, there is no gameplay to see, but what could have been does look really promising. That being said, I do totally understand Microsoft's switch to accommodate a more casual gaming audience. MMOs require a ton of involvement and time with gaining XP and acquiring better items, weapons, and armor, and they really aren't necessarily for the everyday crowd. For our final story, I present probably the most infamous of all of Halo's lost media. Back in 2004 to promote Halo 2, Company 42 put out a trailer for Halo 2's multiplayer, ending with a website called ilovebees.com. Naturally, fans knew that they had to check this website out ASAP, and it was beyond their wildest dreams. The website took players to a seemingly normal bee enthusiast site, but later down the line, the website was hacked and started a countdown to Halo 2's launch. The lore explanation was that an AI's memory was splattered across the website and you had to help it get it back together. At this point, the website became a full-blown ARG where players would have to solve puzzles to reveal locations of payphones where you would call, get some lore, and clues about the next puzzle from the operators playing the AI character. If the player knew the right thing to say, the operator would play recordings called axons, and the player would get to hear the story over the phone or even sometimes get to talk to the characters. This is where the lost media aspect comes in. All the recordings, or axons, are still available and were featured in G4's I Love Bees Halo 2 documentary. However, the operator calls are completely lost, with only some clips still being available. This is also when the infamous Hurricane Ivan incident happened. During the height of the ARG, Hurricane Ivan was rampaging through, and one player decided that he had to get to the bottom of this ARG anyways. He disregarded the Category 5 Hurricane and went out to the payphone. And while on the phone, he was met with the codenamed Puppet Master 2 operator, who broke character and proceeded to say probably one of the funniest things I have ever read.
Dude, it's a hurricane. Put the phone down.
The call was lost, but showed the sheer audacity some of these fans had trying to complete the ARG. If you'd like to know more about the ARG, I highly recommend Rocket Sloth's video on it. He covers the entire thing in full. It's a great watch. Despite that though, we truly do wish there was a way to uncover the lost media that is these payphone calls. But I guess the exact details of those are just in the minds of the people behind this, and those fateful payphone callers for now. That brings us to the end of our hunt for Halo's lost media. This video brought us to tons of places, all connected under one franchise. It makes me wonder how much there is that we don't know about. Stuff that is completely and utterly, well, lost. Our goal here today was to have some fun and talk about some really strange stuff, and I know I really enjoyed it, so I hope you all did too. Long ago, there was a quest of epic proportions that has never been rivaled, a quest to claim fame, fortune, infamy, and treasure, a sword quest, the sword quest. The game series made by Atari for their iconic game system, the Atari 2600. A normal game on the 2600 would have you essentially play the same thing over and over to achieve the highest score you could muster. The games were extremely primitive by today's standards, but were groundbreaking during the early 80s, and as such, changed the way gaming was viewed in the eyes of many. Enter Swordquest. A series that prioritized adventure and treasure, but instead of an 8-bit treasure and a high score, the goal was to solve puzzles to hopefully gain real treasure in the form of the game's 4 artifacts coinciding with each game. Never before had a game set out to accomplish something so grand. Never before had a game attempted to become more than just a game. In the Swordquest series, there were 4 titles following the elements of the Earth. There was Earthworld, Fireworld, Waterworld, and the now elusive Airworld. As we stated, these were more than just games. It was a real adventure. Each title came with a comic book from DC Comics that fleshed out the storyline and lore of the Swordquest universe, and served as essential to unearthing the artifacts. Regarding the actual lore of Swordquest, though the graphics were just some squares and stickmen, the story was richer than just playing the games. The story follows twins Terra and Tor, whose parents were slain by the tyrant king Tyrannus, which is just an A+ from the naming department. The twins were shown the prophecy to get revenge on Tyrannus from the wizard Conjuro, who explained the 5 mystical artifacts who would aid them in their journey. Earthworld, the first game in the series. Originally released in 1982, this game was set to kickstart the entire journey of Terra, Tor, and whichever brave gamer decided to undertake the mythical quest. Each room was themed to a zodiac sign, and as you traversed the rooms, you had to place items found throughout the game in a specific order to unlock a clue in the form of a number. The game wasn't all puzzle solving, but required some quick thinking as well, like any adventure would. 4 of these rooms contained action sequences in the form of raft hopping and waterfall dodging. As for the numbered clues, each clue had 2 numbers, which isn't much help to the brave adventurers, but perhaps consulting the comic book is our next step. Our first clue is 16-4. Checking page 16, panel 4, there's a hidden message inscribed on the tower spelling out the word Spire. The puzzle of Earthworld was to find all 10 clues and then create a sentence, and then send that sentence into Atari as fast as possible. The catch was that 5 of these words were just a wild goose chase. There was a way to single out the correct words, however. On the first page of the comic, the words prime and number are highlighted, leading gamers to get rid of any word that didn't have a prime number of letters, eventually leading to the winning sentence being Quest in Tower, Talisman Found. The
The ones who found this the fastest and sent it to Atari were then invited to play a modified version of the game at Atari headquarters under a 90-minute time limit. Whoever completed the challenge first was awarded the actual talisman, the Talisman of Penultimate Truth, an 18-karat gold disc studded with 12 diamonds and the birthstones of the 12 zodiac signs, with a white gold sword mounted on the front of the medallion. The lucky and skilled warrior who was awarded this incredible prize was Steve Bell, the man pictured here, who honestly looks less of a winner and more like he's being sacrificed by Atari. Regardless, this precious artifact was in the hands of Bell, thus ending the tale of Earthworld. Fireworld, the second game in the series released in 1983. To be blunt, Fireworld was a bit of a disaster, focusing more on action and less on the puzzle solving that made Earthworld fun and challenging. Similar to how the zodiac signs were used in the previous game, Fireworld used the Tree of Life as inspiration for its many rooms. The puzzles in this were still directly connected to the comic book, but were a lot easier to figure out than they were in the previous entry. Using the same method as before, seeking out 10 words and making a sentence using the correct 5 words. The winning sentence this time was, "Leads to Chalice, power abound." The way gamers sifted through the duds was once again by consulting the comics. On the first page of the comic, the word 7 was in a different font, meaning to only use words from comic page numbers that added up to 7. Due to its simple nature, there were more winners than Atari had anticipated. Due to this, Atari hosted a second round, and this second challenge was terrifyingly complex and left many gamers scrambling for words. Only 50 people survived. The challenge was to send a letter to Atari and to explain what gamers liked about Fireworld. Yes, seriously, the biggest video game company needed an ego boost so bad, they sent out their fans to rave about this mythical game which ended up falling short of expectations, and honestly just kinda sucked. Alas, the 50 people were chosen and again ventured to Atari headquarters to fight for the enchanting Chalice of Light. The competition was fierce, but the mighty gladiator Michael Rideout ended up bringing home the gold, the Chalice of Light, a cup made of gold and platinum, studded with diamonds, rubies, sapphires, and pearls. With the Chalice finding a home with Rideout, the tale of Fireworld was over. Waterworld. The third game in the series released in 1983, a few months into the video game crash led by Atari themselves. Due to the market being in shambles and Atari switching leadership from Ray Kassar to James J. Morgan, this game was not even properly released, only available to Atari Club members who could mail away for the game. Morgan was cutting Atari's losses and with that cancelled the contest. The rooms in Waterworld were themed to the 7 spiritual chakras, where players would go through a measly 8 rooms to attempt to unearth the clues and turn in the phrase, "Hasten towards revealed crown." Everyone who entered correctly was given a prize of $2,000 as a sort of, sorry we destroyed your dreams and cancelled the contest. The artifact that was now out of gamers' hands is my personal favorite, the Crown of Life, made of gold and encrusted with diamonds, rubies, sapphires, green tourmalines, and aquamarines. Soon after Morgan took over and the contest was cancelled, Jack Tramiel, owner of Commodore, bought Atari Inc. and turned the company around, forming the Atari Corporation. Airworld, the fourth game in the series, was never released. With the downfall of the contest and Atari under new management, the final adventure was cancelled and never made it to store shelves, thus abruptly ending the tale of Swordquest before it could become a true epic. The rooms were based around the Chinese I Ching, and would feature a whopping 64 rooms. The game made it to only 20% progress before it was cancelled, and for the fate of the comic book, it never even reached the writing stage. The award for completing Airworld was the Philosopher's Stone, a large piece of white jade encased in an 18-karat gold box featuring emeralds, rubies, diamonds, and citrines, though of course, with no game and no contest, this artifact was never given out either. With the cancellation of Airworld, this is where the story starts to take a turn. For the game itself, many people wonder if somewhere out there it truly does exist. Prototypes have surfaced in the past, but have all been proven to be hoaxes. Again, the developers of the game have confirmed it wasn't even 20% completed, so any prototype claiming to be the entire game is just all dead wrong. Overall, there's a certain profound sadness of Airworld's misfortunes and Swordquest's contest as a whole that leaves you wondering. At the end of the day, this story was never finished, and the remaining treasures were never given out to their rightful owners. And all of this brings me to the biggest mystery of all. What happened to the Crown of Life, the Philosopher's Stone, and most of all, the final prize? A prize that would gather the 4 champions of the elements to compete one last time to proclaim victory, and earn the Sword of Ultimate Sorcery. The titular sword of Swordquest, the main MacGuffin in the lore, and the prize to outprize them all. As a quick rewind, I want to talk about the fate of the prizes that did end up in the hands of champions, as even these prizes seem to have an aura of mystery and questions surrounding them today. The first was, of course, the Talisman of Penultimate Truth, won by Stephen Bell. It is unclear as to what really happened to it, but upon receiving the prize he did mention melting it down and selling the gold to buy a car, which Chalice of Light recipient Michael Rideout has since agreed that yes, he did indeed melt it down, and left the little sword on the face of the talisman untouched. As for the aforementioned Rideout, he still holds the chalice and has exclaimed he would turn it into a family heirloom and pass it down through the ages. For the 3 artifacts that were left after the contest was shut down, we can only speculate their true fates. The company that made the prizes was Franklin Mint. Atari commissioned them to make some of the most glorious prizes known to man. After the contest had ended, many thought that Franklin had simply just taken the artifacts back, until lead designer of Swordquest Todd Fry claimed to have seen the Sword of Ultimate Sorcery above Atari CEO Jack Tramiel's mantelpiece, and if he had the sword, it's reasonable to assume the rest of the treasure lie with him. Kurt Vendel, an Atari and video game historian, begs to differ. He points out that Atari really never owned the prizes anyway, they were just essentially promoting them. Warner Communications was the true owner of the prizes, and they were kept with the creators over at Franklin Mint. Vendel claims to have gotten insider information from an ex-employee of Warner Communications, claiming, once Atari was sold, those prizes languished at Franklin Mint. At some point, Franklin Mint disposed of them. They were not retained, because why would they retain the prizes? It's a lot easier just to smelt it back down and turn them into gold coins or other things that they could sell. It is unclear as to whether or not this is entirely true and nearly impossible to prove, but before we set anything in stone, I would like to get to the bottom of Tramiel's stolen treasure. Vendel has an answer for this too, as he claims that yes, an Atari employee did see a sword at Mr. Tramiel's house, but it supposedly wasn't the sword. It was one of the Tramiel family heirlooms passed down generation to generation. Unfortunately, whether or not this is true is also impossible to prove. It's hard to distinguish the validity of Vendel's claims, but it's been 40 years of rumors and myth. He could possibly be telling the truth to all the gamers that ever put a Swordquest game into their Atari 2600 console with the hopes of becoming a legend. The quest is over. It seems Tyrannus won. Regardless of where exactly the artifacts ended up, they don't belong there. They belong in the hands of the champions of the elements, the 4 brave warriors that would have brought peace and tranquility to these lands, and the one to wield the Sword of Ultimate Sorcery to unite them. A contest of this magnitude is unheard of today, but maybe it shouldn't be. Gaming was originally all about fantasy and playing things that could not technically occur in real life, but this contest was set to have real stakes, and possibly bring the world of fantasy into our real world. As each day passes, it feels like this concept is more and more needed. In participating in this legendary quest, all that mattered was what was ahead of you, that being competitors, and an artifact to win, all in good but grand fun. For just a small bit of time, the stresses of the real world could go away, and you could just be a kid again. After all, what was cooler to you as a kid than going on a legendary quest and coming back home with a mythical artifact? Maybe this quest could have shown us that not all of your youth truly has to go away when we grow up. All in all, it's time to bring back the magic to gaming, to inspire hope in these dark times, and to have a king prevail. Alas, the kingdom of nerdom depends on it. Here on the channel, we have never attempted to make a proper holiday special, But the last few years have been chaotic, to say the least, and I think it's about time we make a video that truly captures the spirit of the holidays. There's a chill in the air, and with no time to spare, festivities line the streets, and we've got a story that just can't be beat. A true Christmas classic with a mysterious background. Gather around the fireplace, grab a cup of hot cocoa, and let me tell you the true story of the man who really wrote "'Twas the Night Before Christmas." You may be thinking to yourself, of course we know who wrote "'Twas the Night Before Christmas. It's a classic story that's told time and time again around this time of year. But in reality, the debate about who created this enduring story has been going on since the 1800s. And today, we hope to clear the air. Clark Clement Moore was an author and a scholar, being a professor of Greek and Oriental literature at the General Theological Seminary of the Protestant Episcopal Church. Moore gained a fortune in his side business of architecture and real estate. Moore wrote on history, translated ancient text, and formed a dictionary of the Hebrew language. In his spare time, he wrote poetry, which he would collect in his portfolio. On December 24th, 1822, Moore and his children gathered around a fire on Christmas Eve to hear Moore's new poem. It was titled "A Visit from St. Nicholas," and went as follows.
"'Twas the night before Christmas, when all through the house not a creature was stirring, not even a mouse. The stockings were hung by the chimney with care, in hopes that St. Nicholas would soon be there. The children were nestled all snug in their beds, while visions of sugar plums danced in their hats. And Mama in her kerchief and I in my cap had just settled our brains for a long winter's nap. When out on the lawn there arose such a clatter, I sprang from the bed to see what was the matter. Away to the window I flew like a flash, tore open the shutters and threw up the sash. The moon on the breast of the new fallen snow gave luster of midday to the objects below, when what to my wondering eyes should appear but a miniature sleigh and 8 tiny reindeer. With a little old driver so lively and quick, I knew in a moment it must be St. Nick. More rapid than eagles his coursers they came, and he whistled and shouted and called them by name. Now Dasher, now Dancer, now Prancer and Vixen, on Comet, on Cupid, on Donner and Blitzen, to the top of the porch, to the top of the wall. Now dash away, dash away, dash away all. As dry leaves that before the wild hurricane fly, when they meet with an obstacle mount to the sky, so up to the housetop of the corsairs they flew, with the sleigh full of toys, and St. Nicholas too. And then in a twinkling I heard on the roof the prancing and pawing of each little hoof. As I drew in my head and was turning around, down the chimney St. Nicholas came with a bound. He was dressed all in fur from his head to his foot, and his clothes were all tarnished with ashes and soot. A bundle of toys he had flung on his back, and he looked like a peddler just opening his pack. His eyes how they twinkled, his dimples how merry, his cheeks were like roses, his nose like a cherry. His droll little mouth was drawn up like a bow, and the beard of his chin was as white as the snow. The stump of a pipe he held tight in his teeth, and the smoke had encircled his head like a wreath. He had a broad face and a little round belly that shook when he laughed like a bowlful of jelly. He was chubby and plump, a right jolly old elf, and I laughed when I saw him in spite of myself. A wink of his eye and a twist of his head soon gave me to know I had nothing to dread. He spoke not a word, but went straight to his work, and filled all the stockings, then turned with a jerk. And laying his finger aside of his nose, and giving a nod, up the chimney he rose. He sprang to the sleigh, to his team and gave a whistle, and away they all flew, like the down of a thistle. But I heard him exclaim, ere he drove out of sight, "Happy Christmas to all, and to all a good night."
Moore was, of course, proud of his work, and his children adored the story, and for an entire year, that was all that it was. By December 23, 1823, the poem was anonymously submitted to the Troy Sentinel in Rensselaer County, New York. The poem became widely loved with a rapid succession. The poem featured in newspapers, schools, and poem compilations. Its real big break was being featured in the New York Book of Poetry over a decade after it was originally published. In 1844, Moore released his own compilation of poems and included A Visit from St. Nicholas. This was the first time the poem was claimed to be written by somebody. No longer was this tale anonymous, but Moore had finally taken credit for the literary history he made. This is where the story should end, an anonymous poem finally claimed by its owner. But this is only where this story begins. "14 years before Moore gathered his children to read them his newest poem, another poet by the name of Henry Livingston did the exact same thing with the exact same poem. Not much is actually known about Henry Livingston's personal life, but it was clear that he was of course a poet, having a portfolio of over 24 pieces of work. However, the vast majority of them were not published, as he pretty much would write them for his family. By the time A Visit from St. Nicholas had become famous in the paper, Livingston had been dead, as he died all the way back in 1828. Now, over 2 generations since then, the descendants of Livingston have been making a case to clear his name as the true author of this iconic poem. It is hard to take a 200-year-old claim at face value. We essentially would be putting trust into a 200-year-old game of telephone, bringing us to modern day where Livingston's descendants still claim he wrote the poem. However, there is some evidence pointing towards the fact that Moore might have actually been a fraud. Starting with the most basic of evidence, is that at least 5 children claim to have listened to the story told by Livingston, but this is really hard to take as true evidence. One of the children claimed to have had an original copy, with Livingston's writing clear as day. However, Livingston's house was burned down along with all of his valuables, including the possibly original copy. Without that piece of evidence, this all amounts to that aforementioned game of telephone. But this does perfectly lead into the next piece of evidence, and that does surround the actual poem. The poem was analyzed by a literary professor in Vassar. It was found that when you cross-reference A Visit from St. Nicholas with anything else that Moore had previously wrote, it just does not compare. Moore was anti-tobacco, while Livingston was pro-smoking, making it more evident that Livingston probably wrote it due to Santa smoking a pipe in the story. The poem also includes exclamation points, which doesn't mean much at the surface, but analyzing Moore's poems, it seems he barely used them, while Livingston used them extremely liberally. Even beyond this, the actual style of Livingston's poems seemed to much more closely resemble St. Nicholas than Moore's work. As a common attribute to Livingston's work was this sort of playful, jokey nature. Another scholar, Donald Foster, has noted that a pattern in Livingston's poem was to very frequently use and create repetition with the word all, which is precisely what happens in St. Nicholas. In the poem, there are multiple references to Dutch words, which would be strange coming from Moore, who was American, but Livingston was raised of Dutch heritage, with his mother speaking Dutch. Donner and Blitzen, 2 famous reindeer that accompany Santa, who are originally named Dunder and Bliksem, come from the Dutch language meaning thunder and lightning. The names have changed countless times, and the reasons are still unclear as to why, whether it be Bliksem was changed to Blitzen to better rhyme with Vixen, or a modern update to better fit all together, we are still pretty unsure. But what is important is that these names were originally made with Dutch connections. While we've taken a ton of time to talk about Livingston's case, which does look extremely convincing in many ways, it's important to bring up some points that could help Moore once again too. Firstly, there is precedent for Moore having some Dutch influence to use if the poem is really his. Moore was good friends with Washington Irving, the author of Rip Van Winkle, and Irving was very involved in Dutch culture, which could give Moore some credibility. Second of all, while many of Moore's poems do not seem to match the writing of St. Nicholas, there are a few that do very closely resemble it, most notably being The Pig and the Rooster, which has a super similar rhyme scheme. It's also important to note that the main character in the story specifically turns around and bids a rooster cock-a-doodle-doo, which is very similar to the line of St. Nick remembering to say one last greeting, Happy Christmas and to all a good night. There's also the obvious aspect of the fact that Moore stepped up and took credit at all. While you can endlessly speculate if he did steal this and come forward for credit that way, at the end of the day, this is still significant, because we have no proof of Livingston ever doing this in his life. While tackling a mystery, the passage of time has never really stopped us before, whether we talk about 1400s vampires or 1960s serial killers. The main thing that can bring everything to a conclusive point is, of course, evidence, and unfortunately, it doesn't seem we have enough. No matter where I look, the evidence for either men creating such a long-lasting and influential poem is completely inconclusive. Hopefully in the future, more light could be shed on this long-lasting literary mystery. For whoever wrote this poem, all that is true is the effect it has had on many of our lives. It may just be a story, but for those who celebrate the holiday, it can perhaps serve as a time capsule, a way to bring you back to the days when you were a little kid, genuinely wondering when Santa would come through the chimney and what he would be giving you. And while I'm gonna assume none of you actually saw Santa, despite how hard many of you have tried, I hope that the fate of this true author is not the same. Alas, this year we wanted to celebrate the holidays and tell a tale by the fireplace. It's a stressful time, sure, but at the heart of the holidays is family. So if you've made it this far, turn off the video and go celebrate. It is the night before Christmas after all. What is it about the dark and macabre that fascinates us? Why do multiple cultures surround themselves with symbols of death? And what does it mean to find beauty in death? These are all questions that could conjure up tons of different answers and interpretations. Regardless of questions, death does fascinate human beings, and I think that fascination can be summed up perfectly in goth culture. Goth culture has been a major youth culture since the 1970s, around the time when counterculture itself was starting to gain massive appeal. The term goth was nothing new by this point, but meant something completely different than how we perceive it today. Goths were Germanic people who brought about the final nail in the coffin to the Roman Empire and brought about the medieval age. A lot of the architecture from around the medieval period was also dubbed Gothic architecture, characterized by its very elaborate stained glass windows, high spires, and pointed arches. Goths, punks, metalheads, and all sorts of rebellious young adults were carving out a community that was going against the grain. These misunderstood and ostracized misfits use imagery and words that were intense to get their point across. A lot of these groups only wanted to see some sort of political or societal reform, but yes, a lot of these groups got swept up in the darkness and used it as a way to get out their violent tendencies. Even though goth culture really found its home in the 1970s, there were plenty of gothic iconography in the late 19th and early 20th century. The late 1800s gave us modern interpretations of monsters like Bram Stoker's Dracula, and the scientifically charged Frankenstein by Mary Shelley. This led into goth icons like Bela Lugosi and Lon Chaney, which bred inspiration for countless goth acts all the way until now. If you're a goth, you already know all of this, and personally the goth culture is something I'm heavily involved in, so when I stumbled upon a goth band that had supposedly had some lost music one night while scrolling on Reddit, my interest was piqued. I had personally never heard of the band The Graveyard 5 until now, but their vibes seem interesting based on the base level research I had done by this point. The Graveyard 5 were active from 1967 to 1969, which predates the goth culture explosion by a few years, and the kind of garage rock music they were making sounds really similar to something the Cramps would put out only a few years later. With their surf rock inspired riffs and spooky lyrics, it's quite surreal they were putting this vibe together way earlier than most. As much as I'd like to talk more about my personal interest in goth culture and music, that's not why we're here tonight. The Graveyard 5, as previously mentioned, happen to have some lost media to their name, and a story that goes beyond just spooky songs and gothic imagery. Information on Graveyard 5 is difficult to come by, but their story, from what I can see and as told by the bassist, is as follows. In 1967, Louis Schreiner, Dave Templeton, Dennis Roller, and Steve Kuppinger all met each other one day at a convenience store. They got along well and decided to form a band together. Schreiner on lead guitar and vocals, Templeton on drums, Roller on rhythm guitar, and Kuppinger on bass.
It seems to me that we got together in 1967 and we're still together in late 69. There were 4 of us in the band. The 5th member was the Coffin. Louis Schreiner, lead guitar, and Dave Templeton, drums, lived in Kelseyville. Dennis Roller, the rhythm player, and I, Steve Kuppinger, bassist, lived in Lakeport. Our first rhythm player was Gary Prather, but he didn't last very long. He lived on Cobb Mountain outside of Kelseyville. We went through rhythm players like Bubblegum until we found Dennis. He stayed until the bitter end.
After a few sessions together, they still did not have a name for this new band they were creating, and after a supposed supernatural encounter while playing with an Ouija board, the Graveyard 5 were born.
I like to think that the name of the group had a lot to do with me. The night we got the name, we were fooling around with a Ouija board. Louis and I sat down and we asked the board to prove itself. We turned off all the lights. Our hands got icy cold and we heard someone walking outside the window on the gravel. There was no one there. It was after that that the Graveyard 5 came to life.
They started their musical career in bars and small venues across the California Bay Area. According to Kuppinger,
bars where they just were not ready for us. We had fights on the stage and I had beer bottles thrown at us while we played. It was some really hard work for very little pay.
Their act included elaborate lights and a dark stage presence, and I'm sure you're thinking to yourself, there's only 4 members and the band is called Graveyard 5. Well, the 5th member was absent in the musical and writing process and was only ever on stage with them. This 5th member being a coffin that the band would bring on stage to really drive home the macabre ambience they were going for.
One stormy night, we were playing a high school somewhere in the middle of California. We always played the first song, then we would introduce the band. We finished the song, and before we could say anything, the coffin lid popped open. There was this coffin right in front of us, and to this day, we do not know how it did that. We went on playing, but backed away from it just a little. The coffin was always carried in by 4 guys and set in front of us. That night, the lid stayed open until we had all the equipment loaded, then all of us went back in and carried it out.
Over time, the band really found their stage presence and became popular in the Bay Area, attracting people towards their strange live shows. This sudden burst of popularity came from them opening to other more successful local Bay Area bands. They entered a battle of the bands and eventually came out on top, beating out their competition, the Fatigues. Producer Stan Sweeney offered the Graveyard 5 a record deal to publish a single under Sweeney's label Stanco. The band needed 2 songs that they would publish first to get their name out there, before working on a full studio album. On a stormy October night, the band got together at Lakeport's Hartley Cemetery, where they frequently wrote their songs. That night, they penned the now Halloween classic, Marble Orchard.
It was a very stormy night. Lightning, thunder. We sat in an old Studebaker station wagon and wrote the song as it happened. The heartbeat in the beginning is me thumping my bass strings. I put a lot of reverb and echo on it, and it came out better than the stock heartbeat they had recorded to use. I seem to remember that when Lewis asked me for the cigarette, I handed him a Lucky Strike non-filter. So if you can picture it, then that is about what it looked like that night in the cemetery.
The song starts off with an eerie heartbeat effect from the bass guitar and flows right into a gothic garage rock surfer jam. It's an incredible song and I strongly recommend listening to it. Just finish the video first, gotta get up that watch time.
Some people go to graveyards, some people go to die, some people go to graveyards, hippies go to get high.
The single's B-side had Graveyard 5 Theme. This song is just an instrumental and still maintains that spooky surf rock aesthetic with a great riff and buzzing throughout the song.
There wasn't a large amount of 45s pressed. I seem to remember 2 or 3 boxes, but they were very small boxes. We were going to have more pressed, but never did. One box was given to DJs to put on jukeboxes, and others were given to friends and people we thought could help us.
This single was a hit and was going to shoot the Graveyard 5 to a much bigger audience than they had before. This is going to be a benchmark in music and set the tone for more lighthearted and playful instrumentals while still maintaining that eerie feel with its tone and lyrics, similar to what I mentioned before, like The Cramps. The single was wanted across the nation, but disaster struck before the vinyl could make it to the public. Louis Schreiner, while on vacation in Florida, suffered a disastrous mental breakdown and destroyed all of the band's equipment. Schreiner pulled a gun on Kuppinger's sister, who was Schreiner's wife at the time, and tossed the master tapes from Marble Orchard into an alligator-infested lake, tossed the speaker in, and paddled around in it with the guitar as the paddle. After this unfortunate destruction, the band trucked on and went on to work on another single with Stanco Records. In 1969, the Graveyard 5 were set to release Stay By My Grave and Out of the Night.
We didn't go into the studio again until maybe 7 or 8 months later after we cut the first 45. We worked on Stay By My Grave for maybe 2 or 3 weeks. It was finished. The final mix was done, but it just never got cut. I think it is some of the best stuff we ever did. That song still haunts me. The bass part came in one practice. Lewis was playing a riff and I just started playing the part. That is the way it came out. Think of lightning sizzling through the air with a coat of thunder. It sounds like thunder, but very different. It is so very hard to describe it. The lead part breaks over the singing. Every time I heard it, it would send chills down my spine. I've never heard anything like it. It took a few weeks working to get that effect, but it was well worth the work.
With the band having their Marble Orchard single destroyed and Louis Schreiner becoming more and more erratic, the new singles were never released, and slowly ended the very short, niche popularity of the Graveyard Five. The singles that never surfaced wasn't the end of the lost media of the Graveyard Five, as supposedly there was an entire album that was set to release shortly after the tour they were on, and of course, never surfaced. Marble Orchard and Graveyard Theme aren't difficult to find online, and both exist on most streaming services, but the physical pressing of the single is a highly sought after collectible in the music community. One of the records went for a whopping $4,500. As for the other singles and full album, they were all recorded and just never released, which means there's a very slight possibility that the Stay By My Grave single is out there somewhere, as it was finished, but never released. And this story isn't quite over yet, as all 4 members of the Graveyard Five are still alive. I guess except the 5th member, who was technically never even alive at all. 3 out of the 4 members suffered strange and life-altering events happen to them. Roller was severely burned on his arms and still suffers with that to this day. Coopinger was diagnosed with reflex sympathetic dystrophy, and Templeton is currently in prison. Schreiner, as far as I know, is just still living in California. Hopefully he's become mentally healthier than he was during the band years.
There was something very strange that followed that band, and I think it took its toll on Lewis. I think it has hit all of us. David is in prison, and hell, Lewis might even be dead by now. The last time I talked to him, he was very bad off, and I haven't gotten away clean. 30 years ago, reflex sympathetic dystrophy hit me, and the doctors have been trying to control the pain ever since. There is no cure. The only one I do not know about is Dennis Roller, but he did get burned very bad, on both arms, his chest and his back. Almost all of his little finger was burned off, so I think all of us have been hit by whatever it was that followed us around. Sometimes when it is really late and stormy, I can still feel it, almost like it is waiting out in the dark for me to start another band.
This was a wild story of some super interesting musical themed lost media. This script started very bare bones, to be honest, but honestly was saved by the interview of Coopinger that we used throughout. It was some amazing insight that helped me understand more of this supposedly cursed band. Hopefully one day the newer singles can be found. Perhaps they'll surface the same day London After Midnight does. Now that'd be the greatest moment in goth culture history. Thank you guys so much for watching. If you like this video, of course, make sure to like the video and subscribe. If you like the channel, make sure to check out our social medias in the description below. Make sure to stop by our Discord, it really is the best place to chat with us and hang with fellow Debunk enthusiasts. Of course, if you'd like to support the channel a little bit more, please head on over to our Patreon, Debunk Plus. For only $1 a month and you guys get access to videos early, script PDFs, whatever random stuff we decide to put up, and more. As always, my name is Sep from Debunk File. See you guys next time. Bye.